News Talk ZB in Weekend Sport. Well, the Wellington Phoenix have what could potentially be their biggest game of A-League men's football this season this afternoon. They play Sydney FC at Eden Park in Auckland from 3. 7 games to go. The Phoenix are 5th, just 1 point ahead of their opponent Sydney FC, so a win for either this afternoon would solidify their own playoff hopes and, at the same time, put a dent in the top 6 aspirations of the other. James Dodd, a very credible football voice on the other side of the Tasman, works as a writer, broadcaster, journalist for the A-League's online platforms and joins us to preview this one. James, thanks so much for joining us across New Zealand. Before we look at this game specifically, what have you made of the Wellington Phoenix in general terms this season?
Hey, Piney. Yeah, do you know what? I think it's... I'm so in awe of the Phoenix's ability to pivot season on, season after. And even if they lose players or, some players go or they come back in, their recruitment seems to be fantastic every single time. Ufuk Talay seems to have this incredible ability of just getting them to play the same way that he wants them to. I think most people have always thought that, the Knicks are essentially like everybody's second team. The way that they play, when you think of teams playing good football, you think of how Wellington play. And I think, the fact that they're in the finals race again, they're in a strong position going into the sort of the business end of the season. I think it's a real big credit to Ufuk and the job that he's done with his coaching staff, because they can beat any team on their day. And, when you've got a team that can do that, it means that they're a very dangerous proposition. If
we drill down into a couple of key players, obviously Oscar Zavada, your eyes are drawn to him. He's led the line with 11 goals so far this season. How does he compare to the other top strikers going around the A-League men's at the moment?
See, it's a good question, because what I like about Oscar Zavada is that he's a different type of profile to the others as well. He's a real sort of, in stature, you think he's a target man, but he's so much more than that. He's got a lovely technique about him and the way that he brings other players into the game. And, if you were to compare someone size for size, maybe Ibasuki at Adelaide would be someone that you would kind of put in the same basket as Oscar Zavada. But I actually think the way in which Oscar Zavada has taken a little bit of time to get settled into the league, as is expected with foreign players. When they move to a country where their language isn't their first language, and they move to a completely new place that they've never lived before or worked before, and new teammates. I think he's been fantastic. And I think if you look around the league at some of the other strikers, Brandon Borrello is up there and is not a recognised sort of number 9 or a leading line player. He's been in great form, but I think you're hard-pressed if you're looking at picking a team of the season come the end of the season. Jamie McLaren will naturally be in there because of the sheer amount of goals that he scores, but you're going to be hard-pressed to overlook Oscar Zavada to be playing alongside him in that team, because the goals are one thing, Piney, but I think if you look at just everything that he brings to the side in terms of the ability to hold the ball when they're under pressure and they're really trying to maintain a lead or they're trying to get back into the game, he can do everything. And I think that's, it speaks volumes of the recruitment process again from Wellington Phoenix, because they found Oscar Zavada. They found players like Božidar Krajev, who I'm sure you're going to mention. They keep finding them and they keep delivering and they keep performing so well. And, Oscar Zavada for me is without doubt, has been one of the signings of the season.
Oh, we'll get to Krajev, but right down the other end is Ollie Sale, of course, and the news this week that he's off to Perth Glory on a 3-year deal, and he's been a player that Wellington Phoenix fans have loved watching, particularly since he's forced his way into the side. He's had to bide his time. As far as goalkeepers go and Ollie Sale's performances, what have you made of him this season?
Quite simply, I actually think Ollie's arguably the best goalkeeper in the league, Piney, and I think you would know better than most about the journey that Ollie's been on with the Wellington Phoenix and the fact that he took so long to try and force his way into the side. He had a couple of issues, didn't he, disciplinary issues that maybe a lesser character and a lesser player and somebody who isn't as willing to learn from mistakes would have probably fallen by the wayside. But Ollie picked himself up. He got himself back on track and really worked hard to secure that spot to become New Zealand's number 1, And I think for me, when I first saw the news about the move to Perth Glory, I was a little bit surprised. But then I think maybe sometimes players do just need a little bit of a change of scenery in order to go to that next level. Ollie Sale's 27, so he's in a very good age profile for a goalkeeper. We know that he's really established himself as one of the best goalkeepers in the league. And maybe he might feel as though the move to Perth Glory might enable him to then, there might be, hypothetically, there might be a clause in the contract with Ollie that means if a European or an Asian club comes in for him, then that makes his pathway that little bit easier. And I suppose you on paper, you think maybe it's a step down going from Wellington to Perth. It might be that he actually just wants to experience something new after 10 years with a football club, and good on him for that. I think most fans won't begrudge Ollie, because he has really turned his career around. He captains the side. He leads by example. I mean, I was at the Central Coast game recently when Oscar Zavada nicked that late equaliser, and some of the saves that Ollie Sale pulled off were quite remarkable, really. And I think that speaks to the character of him, knowing that this deal would have been signed a little while ago. It would have been in the background, but he still puts in those performances week in, week out. And I think that's all you can really ask for from someone who knows that their future doesn't lie at the club, but they still put in those top level performances.
Can I ask you about Sydney FC? They've had a bit of a topsy-turvy time of things, not just this season, but in the last couple. But they find themselves in this top six position. Just what are the biggest threats that Sydney FC present for Wellington Phoenix this afternoon?
It's going to be really interesting, because one of the biggest outs for Sydney this afternoon is going to be that there's no Max Burgess. And he is a player that, is so prodigiously talented, and he really, really looks like he's found his groove at Sydney in particular this season. He's just been rewarded with a new deal, and the fact that he's not going to be playing, I think that's a massive, massive boost for Wellington Phoenix, because he has that ability to kind of wriggle in past players, to dazzle when he has to, and he's started scoring goals a lot bit more regularly this season as well, which is a real plus for Sydney FC, and that's actually going to be a real boost, a real to detriment of them this afternoon, the fact that he's not there. So that's a massive, massive plus for Wellington Phoenix. For me, I think Joe Lolly is the key for Sydney FC. We know his pedigree, having played over in the Championship for such a long time in Nottingham Forest. And when you see Joe Lolly, if he is able to take control of the game and run the game, then that's bad news for whoever Sydney FC are playing. And I think that will be key in Ufuk-Talei's tactical setup this afternoon. I think he will know that. I think he will know that Joe Lolly, whilst you can't focus all of your attention on him, because then that frees up people like Anthony Caceres, for example, or Robert Mack. I think when you've got Joe Lolly in that position, when he's dangerous and when he is firing, he can score goals out of nowhere. He can create goals out of nowhere. And I think that's the real key for Sydney FC, because if they can get Joe Lolly into positions on the pitch, not just in a goal-scoring perspective, but if he can find pockets of space, if he can get between the lines, then that's where Wellington Phoenix could potentially be hurt by them.
You mentioned Ufuk-Talay, or have done a couple of times this afternoon, as his 100th match in charge of Wellington. So coming towards the end of his fourth season, the overriding feeling over here, and I'm sure you're hearing it over there as well, Dotty, is that this will be Ufuk-Talay's last season in charge of Wellington. How do you assess, what he's done and what has been a pretty challenging 4 years?
Quite incredible, really. I think if you look at when Ufuk took the job, there was absolutely no way that anybody could have predicted the predicament that Wellington would have found themselves in during the pandemic, and having to relocate all that time, and having family in different countries, and just the actual sort of the human aspect of it would be a mountain to climb for anybody. And the fact that Ufuk-Talay has been able to steer this team into the finals, consistently, and playing really good football at the same time. The recruitment has been excellent. I think all of those things are massive ticks against somebody's name when potential clubs are looking at them saying, what sort of job has this person done here? And I think, there would be a plethora of clubs looking at Ufuk-Talay and going, this guy's almost worked. Miracle seems a bit extreme, but, not far off that, the job that he's been able to do. And I think, like similar to Ollie Sale, I don't think many people would begrudge Ufuk, leaving and taking up an opportunity elsewhere, where that may be. I'm not entirely sure, but, I would be gobsmacked if there aren't bigger clubs overseas that are taking a keen interest in Ufuk's services and his coaching staff, because his record speaks for itself, Piney. You're there game in, game out, and you see the way he carries himself. We know he can be a little bit fiery sometimes, but at the same time, he carries himself so well. And for me, that has all the hallmarks of someone who's going to go on to have a very, very successful coaching career. All right. Well, just to finish, this would probably be an easier question to answer in a few hours once the final whistle's blown. But, with 7 games to go, for our New Zealand audience, what do you predict for the Wellington Phoenix? Are they a top 6 side? Are they a top 4 side even? Might there be a home final for the fans to enjoy over here? Do you know what? I was looking at the table before I came on, and I think Wellington will sneak into the top 4, because I think if you look at Melbourne City, we know they're a lock. Western Sydney Wanderers have really found their form again, and they're a really hard team to beat. Then you've got Adelaide United, who have seemingly turned a little bit of a corner, and they've really got their mojo back. And I think that last spot, is really up for grabs. I think if Wellington can beat Sydney FC this afternoon, then they're in pole position for it. Because I think if you look at the Central Coast Mariners, they've really struggled with suspensions. They've struggled with players being away with the young Socceroos. And I think all of those things combined, a couple of injuries as well, I think that's really, really hampered Nick Montgomery and the progress and the run of form that his team were on. So my prediction is that if the Knicks can get the job done against Sydney FC today, then I think that will propel them on to go and secure a top 4 finish.
It's been wonderful to get your analysis and your insight, James. Thanks so much for joining us here on News Talk ZB across New Zealand. Look forward to maybe catching up when these finals roll around.
Absolutely. Pleasure, Piney. Speak to you soon.
That is James Dodd, football commentator, writer, broadcaster and journalist for the A-League's online platforms. The Wellington Phoenix play Sydney FC. Kick-off not too far away, 3 o'clock this afternoon at Eden Park in Auckland. A win for Wellington would take them to 31 points and inside the A-League men's top 4. Can they stay there? Can they push for that home final, a home playoff, which happens if you finish in the top 4? Next assignment, Sydney FC this afternoon at Eden Park.